What's up, guys? Welcome back to Tranceportal in the studio with me, EverLight. So this episode is all about audio samples. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Ableton Live's warp modes. Now, Ableton's time stretching features are awesome, from everything from cleaning up percussion to getting vocals sounding pitch perfect and in time. And this episode is going to cover a few of the use cases for each of Ableton Live's warp algorithms. So let's get stuck straight into it. What's up, guys? We are inside of Ableton Live here. I have a very sparse project open. How I'm going to work this is I'm going to show you some examples of different types of content that you are likely going to be wanting to time stretch. So we're looking at things like drum loops, vocal samples, some melodic loops, that sort of thing. And we are going to be discussing in brief, nice, bright and quick and easy, how to set up the time stretching options in Ableton to be perfect for each one of those types of sound. So here I have loaded a drum loop. This is a drum and bass drum loop. I'll play the original version. Super quick, very fast BPM, and we are taking that and putting it into the project and slowing it down to 138 BPM so that we can use it in a trance track. So trying to time stretch a sample in Ableton is really easy. All you need to do is drag and drop the sample directly onto the arrangement view, and Ableton will do its best to analyze the sample, figure out what BPM it is, and match it so that it fits with the BPM of your song. So I've gone ahead and done that. Just a reminder, here's the original. And here's the version that Ableton has time stretched for us. Slowed down to 138 BPM. Now that doesn't sound too bad at all, and this is where most producers will just stop. They'll just drag and drop things in there. But actually, that loop can be cleaned up and made to sound even better. And all we need to do is tweak some of the options inside of Ableton Live's warp modes. To get access to the warp mode controls, you need to double click the sample, so you are looking at this view. And the main things that we are looking at are going to be the grid view along the bottom and the warp options, which are on the left here. There are a few different types of options available to you, including the algorithm type, which is this thing here. Some of these are named quite self-explanatory. For example, beats, that's obviously going to be good for drums, but some of them, like Complex and Complex Pro, not necessarily super useful, so you kind of have to use your ears on whether or not they're going to be good for the types of sound that you're using. You've also got some additional controls for specific to the algorithm style that you have used, including these little options here, which we'll get into in just a moment. Now, by default, Ableton will drag and drop a sample. It will analyze it as beats, which is for drums, and it will put it as preserve transients, and it will select this backward and forward arrow at 100%. And this is what it sounds like, just to remind you. We can get that sounding even better by just making a few tweaks. First of all, let's go ahead and change this little arrow to just forward. This will make the drum loop snappier. Another thing that we can do is, instead of preserving the transients, we can go to preserve 1/16, and it will make it have like a gated effect. The number on the left here controls how long each of the slices is. So if we reduce this down, the drum loop will begin to start to sound nice and snappy. But if you're happy to just have, in the case of a drum loop, just have it pitched down in order to slow the loop down, then you can simply select repitch, and that won't introduce any artifacting, but it will pitch the sample down. Okay, so here I have a vocal sample. This is again from a drum and bass sample pack, 170 BPM, the original sample speed is. Yeah. So the thing here is we're going to slow this down now to 138 BPM, which you would use for a trance track, and it's still set to the original warp settings. And you're going to notice that how this is really not a good setting to have for a vocal, and you can hear for yourself. Yeah. So it introduces all sorts of weird glitches and cuts and chops, and generally just sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
Again, we can get that sounding super clean. All we need to do is figure out the correct warp mode that we want to use for vocals. Now, generally there are two modes that are really good for vocals. They are Complex and Complex Pro. They both have different slight textures and tonality to them, and are kind of useful depending on what it is that you want to achieve with the vocal. If you are simply just looking to slow the vocal down, then I would recommend going with Complex Pro, and generally you can keep it on the default settings for the new options that appear, which are called Formats and Envelope. I've done that. I'll play it now. You can hear for yourself.
Yeah.
So immediately you can hear that all of the weirdness, all of the glitches and stuff are completely removed with this setting. Now, another thing that the Complex Pro warp algorithm is useful for is preserving the naturalness of a vocal when you pitch it up and down. So here it is original again.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go ahead and pitch it down a few semitones.
Yeah.
It tries to do its best to keep what's known as the formant, or the natural character of the vocal, as clean as possible without making it sound like it's gone too deep or making it sound like it's gone too high. You know how sometimes when you pitch up a vocal sample it can sound an awful lot like a chipmunk? Well, this Pro mode, the Complex Pro, will do its best to try and avoid that.
Yeah.
There it is pitched up, still sounding quite natural. Now, sometimes you might actually want to have that effect included. Sometimes, for example, if you were making some kind of funky, dark sounding vocal, or you want to make a vocal effect, you might actually want to have that weird, unusual pitching up or pitching down effect. And if you do want to have that, but you still want to keep the natural the natural timing and make it sound nice and smooth, you just need to use Complex, the Complex warp mode. And now when I pitch this up and down, it will still have that nice smooth timing to it, but you still get the odd and unusual artifacting of the pitching.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, if I pitch it up.
Yeah.
So just to compare, this is regular complex mode.
Yeah.
And this is Complex Pro.
Yeah.
So here we have the lead sound, and I've drag and dropped it in. It's supposed to be 140 BPM, but in this case we're going to be warping it down to 135 BPM just as an example. And I'll play it with you, dragged and dropped in with just the default settings. So again, this is warp mode beats, preserve transients with the arrows back and forth. So as you can hear, very wobbly, kind of glitchy, not very clean at all. So let's figure out what we can do to fix that. So leads and melodic sounds, like things like pads especially, are kind of interesting in the time stretching department because you're going to have to figure it out on your own. There isn't any really hard and fast rules on what sounds good and what doesn't. You can use a bunch of different types of algorithms. It all depends on whatever you think sounds the best. So we'll run through with beats. Beats is an interesting one to use for main leads because you can create some quite interesting effects with it and make it sound even unique, rather kind of edit the sound in a lot of ways and make it sound different. So let's go ahead and try on this main lead what we did with our drums originally. So we'll set it to 16th and we'll set it to 1 bar going forward. 1 arrow, sorry, and then we'll hit play. Immediately you can hear that's cleaned it up. Now that's because this melody follows a 16th note rhythm. It plays 1 note every 16th. So actually setting the beats mode to preserve 16th is probably going to be a pretty good choice. So that could potentially be a decent option for you to use depending on the type of melody that's playing and how fast it is. You can also mess around with this number here, and if we change the length of each note down, you start to get like a snappy staccato kind of effect. like we did with our drums earlier. So let's move on to the vocal modes that we use. We use Complex and we use Complex Pro. Again, these sound slightly different, so it's up to you on what you think sounds good. We'll just go ahead and we'll just put it on Complex. Complex doesn't sound too bad, but I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a little bit of like a weird wobbly phasiness kind of going on there, and the high end isn't as pronounced as it was if you just hadn't have time stretched it at all. And finally, let's check out texture. And once again, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's some little bit of phasing on there, but that actually sounds pretty good. Depending on how extreme your time stretching is, how quickly or slowly you want to slow something down, there's going to be different settings that you're going to want to try. But the main purpose of this video is that it's never good to just drop a sample in and just leave it on the default settings. There are plenty of times where I've heard a production or a track where in the background I can hear that someone has used a sample and they've used the incorrect warp setting, and I can hear clicking and different artifacting coming from that setting. It's way more common than you might think. So overall, just make sure that when you are importing your samples, your little bits, whatever it is that you're using, that you experiment with the warp modes inside of Ableton to try and find the one that suits the content you are importing the most. Guys, that's everything I have time for today. I hope you have found this useful. This, of course, has been Tranceportal in the studio with me, EverLight. Don't forget to check out our Tranceportal social channels and subscribe to us here on YouTube. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. I will see you all again next time.